This will be a day long remembered. Now I am the master.
Welcome to another episode of Legends and Theories, and welcome to my ranking of the top 10 biggest mistakes made in Star Wars. For this, I'm only looking at in universe mistakes made by characters that are not essentially forced by the plot. I will mention what those are in a moment. I will have 6 other events that I'm going to do as honorable mentions before 3 of them being ones that were more bad decisions because the plot forced it to happen, and is more for bad writing than a genuine mistake the character would have made. The other 3 are mistakes that only have a hypothetical endpoint, and we don't know truly what the impact of them would be, but all these mistakes that I am listing here have giant repercussions that lead to galaxy altering events, and almost all of them cause crazy stuff, and most of them are built up on previous mistakes. This is ranked in an order, but if you're to be realistic, the earliest one on here that isn't an honorable mention would technically be the starting cause of all of these. But since the fact that history could have changed at these different points, I still have them ranked by their impact and not in chronological order, because even though one of these could have led to it, things could have changed with different decisions. So let's go first into the 6 honorable mentions after I mention one other thing. There might be a few ties on here, but the ties are mainly for either sub decisions that, after that first mistake, just help reinforce that mistake to make it explode and just kind of push things to go to an even worse point. Or if it's the same event happened, well, same consequence of an event happened differently from canon and legends. And some of them are exclusively to canon or legends. I'll mention those also. But those are the 2 times that I will allow a tie on this, which is basically, as I said, if one mistake is followed up by another mistake that just makes it happen just a little bit faster, or if it's different events caused the same outcome in canon or legends. And the 3 of bad writing mistakes that I'm going to look at are all from the sequel trilogy. And those decisions is at third place, just in the entire bad setup of the New Republic government, with it all being taken out in one attack by the First Order, and them basically being able to fall and having the government so poorly built that it fully collapses within a few weeks. And that's pretty bad leadership. And another thing with this is we don't know the full impact of it happening, since they haven't really gone past this era yet. But still, it's a pretty big mistake, and something that really is just a pretty bad decision for the New Republic, and a mistake that they in the Galaxy paid for. The second is Luke Skywalker just giving up on the Jedi and everything, because that allowed just so much more worse stuff to happen, and he easily could have stopped the entire threat of the First Order going up against, and easily would have defeated Snoke, Kylo Ren, and the reborn Palpatine. And if Luke didn't just do his out of character decision to try and murder his nephew, then he could have either saved him from the dark side or managed to hunt down Snoke and Palpatine and defeat them. But just bad writing decisions put him in this really bad spot, and honestly, it just left him at a bad place and just made The Last Jedi such a terrible movie. The final one for these bad ratings is Palpatine deciding to announce his attack, and this feels the most out of character for Palpatine. Someone who used subtlety and manipulation to be able to take over the Republic, just out of nowhere decides to give everyone a few days in advance warning that he's going to be coming with an undefeatable fleet. I mean, literally, if Palpatine did not announce this, he could have just showed up like 3 days later with his Death Star destroyer fleet and automatically won. It is such a stupid decision for him to do it, and this is the most out of character one of all of them, and is one that cost Palpatine his control of the galaxy. Now going into the next part, these three do have pretty big impacts on the galaxy if we if they weren't made, but we don't know what those impacts would be, and even though it could be a big impact, I think that there's a chance things could have gone severely differently, but it could have also went the same way, so that's why I have these three here. The third one for this is the fact that Darth Vitiate decided to trust Lord Scourge, and this is one done during the Revan novel and going into the game The Old Republic, and his trust of Scourge led to his downfall and him not being able to commit his genocide of all life of the galaxy. And the reason it's here is because even if he didn't trust Scourge and did the smart thing and killed him, because Scourge did make moves against him and was always planning on betraying Vitiate, he still could have tried to go with his plan, and I think there is still a pretty good chance that he could have been defeated still, and the Jedi would have taken him out. But of course, there's always a chance that he could have succeeded and wiped out all life in the galaxy besides himself, and I think that would go pretty badly for the galaxy, obviously. But since it's no certainty, I think it has to go in this ranking, and this was one that I was thinking about going on the list, but it's just too hypothetical to what could have happened for it to be able to get on the list. The second one is one of the only mistakes that the Chiss Grand Admiral Mithrani Roto ever made, and that was to fully trust the Noghri. And with that, he didn't know that Leia Organa just was able to reveal a deception that the Empire did to trick the Noghri, and was able to have them join the side of the New Republic. And the Noghri decided to do this secretly, and were able to assassinate Thrawn at the Battle of Belbringi, and through that, this changed really everything for the Empire. This was their last good chance, since although Palpatine would return from the dead, he would try to wipe out a good amount of the Imperials, and only wanted those that are most loyal to him to remain, and most of them didn't want to go behind him, but Thrawn was seen as the best chance for the Empire, and with that, Thrawn also did have plans to take on the Vong, and was the best chance against them. I will be talking about the Vong later on that list, but considering that trillions died in that war, I think it's a pretty good fact to say that if Thrawn survived, things could have ended significantly differently, but there's a good chance that Palpatine could have killed him when he returned from the dead, or something else could have happened to the galaxy, and Thrawn might not have been able to stop the threat of the Vong, so that's why it's here. And at number one of these, the most hypothetical one of all of these, is Anakin deciding to leave the world of Mortis. And this one, we have really no idea what would have happened because it's just the most hypothetical one. With the other two, we at least have the hypothetical path that the galaxy could have went on. But if Anakin stayed on Mortis, I really have no idea what would have happened because Palpatine would have lost his access to Anakin, and he either would have been defeated by the Jedi or been able to enact Order 66 earlier, or maybe even a little later, and either could have wiped out the Jedi or been defeated by them. Either way, if things would be significantly different because either one of two things would happen: the Republic would remain intact and the Jedi would still be there and would either have to figure out their flaws and fix them, or continue to be flawed, or Palpatine would have wiped out the Jedi and the Skywalker twins, Luke and Leia, would not have been born, and them not being born and being extremely significant to the rebellion, things would have ended severely differently. And now going into the actual top 10. This video is going to be pretty long since it's already at about 13.5 minutes. I'm going to explain these a little more depth and just how big of an impact they did have on the galactic events. And the other one at a more smaller scale is number 10, but it still has a pretty big impact on the galaxy. And number 10 is technically a three-way tie between a few really bad decisions made by the Hutts, and two of these are the exact same event, one from canon, one from Legends, but the impact of it is a little different by the other event, which is the main one of it, which is the Hutt Council during the War of the Bounty Hunters event being tricked into attacking the Imperials and doing that, which led to their execution by Darth Vader. This put all the power into Jabba the Hutt, which leads to technically the next two, which is Jabba the Hutt deciding to not take Luke Skywalker's advice to let them go and wanting to get revenge. And that's mainly two different ones because the impact is pretty different, with Jabba not just wanting to let the Jedi and his friends go, he leads to his death, and that leads to a immense power vacuum in the galaxy. But with this, it is pretty different in both canon and legends. In both, the Hutts never seem to really recover, but it seems to be a lot more devastating in canon, where Jabba's territories are broken down from being galaxy-wide to only the city of Mos Espa, as seen in the Book of Boba Fett, but also has people grabbing for power and taking over his authority across the galaxy, and leads to a big upset in the galactic community of criminals. But impacts and legends are still pretty big, and the main thing about canon has over it is that Jabba gets everything from the Hutt Council after Vader executes them, which gives him a lot more power and influence, and it's completely devastating to the Hutts. Well, it's just a really major blow in Legends, and both ways, still a really big impact on the Hutts and changed the position of power for criminals in the galaxy basically forever. But it was a lot more devastating in canon, since it seemed Jabba had a lot more control over the criminal underworld than he did in Legends. At number 9 goes to both, which is putting too many of the Empire's best on the first Death Star. And I really want to go to the fact that Tarkin was also a little too arrogant to not want to leave. But I think that just really wouldn't have changed much, since even if Tarkin did try to leave, it's unlikely he would have been able to make it to a ship in time. And even if he did, he probably wouldn't have been able to escape the blast. So, although that's a little more hypothetical, and why I'm not fully including it, the impact of the first Death Star's destruction was pretty major, and it turned the decision to destroy Alderaan also into a mistake, because if they destroyed Alderaan and kept the Death Star, they not only would have had their best military minds, they also would have been able to make anyone against them not want to make a move, since they could destroy their world. But with the Death Star being destroyed, anyone that was outraged over the destruction of Alderaan defected to the rebellion, and the fact that they lost so many of their more competent leaders, they suffered a really big blow, which did suffer during the entire campaign against the rebellion, which was taken far more seriously after that. And with the fact that Vader did suffer a lot from that, and Palpatine was very displeased with him, but being the only survivor would have made it a lot higher if Vader did die, but Vader surviving puts it a little lower, and the fact that this didn't end the war, but just really began it, keeps it down here, but the events are still pretty big. At number 8, I have more the combination of a bunch of small mistakes that I'll go into one bigger mistake, but that is the Jedi's decision to, during the Clone Wars, be more ignoring the will of the Force and just fully committing to the Republic and fighting the Clone Wars, and also looking past a lot more of the problems with the galaxy and some of the conspiracies in the Clone Wars, just trying to end it as fast as possible before the Sith plots came to its conclusion. And throughout this, I'm talking about not only the fact that the Jedi were seemingly losing their way in the prequels and not only too involved with the Republic, but also just fully listening to them instead of the Force and doing things that they probably shouldn't have. The Jedi probably shouldn't have been leading the Clone Wars. If they did, they probably should have been doing it in a different way. They probably should have been serving alongside the clones, and they were making a similar vision to what Revan did back during the Mandalorian Wars, and that decision isn't going to make it on here because although it did have a good amount of impact on the galaxy, it was more of a short-term one and isn't as big as anything else on here, which does affect the future of the galaxy, and the Revan decision just didn't cause as much problems, but still, this is some pretty big series of mistakes, especially since the Jedi did learn that Dooku was the one to create the clone army, and had not anyone know this. And if they just looked into this more and exposed it, they could have saved the galaxy from a lot more death and destruction. The main reason that this isn't any higher is because all these decisions did cause a lot of bad things to happen. There was still some points where it could have been salvaged. That one point specifically is going to be a lot higher up on the list because that does have significant impact on the galaxy, but so all these mistakes just built up towards it, and this just didn't help anything really. Going on to the next point, I have at number 7 attempting to mug Cassian Andor, and this was made by some security officers when Cassian Andor was looking for information on his sister, and this mistake was, like a few other ones you'll see on here, made by some insignificant characters, but has major impact on the galaxy since this decision forced Cassian Andor onto a path where he would eventually be able to steal the Death Star plans and cause the super weapon to be destroyed, where he would sacrifice himself in the process. But if this didn't happen, the galaxy would be a different place with the Death Star still being intact, at least in canon. But with it, since this happened, it set off a chain of events that led to the Death Star's destruction and eventually the victory of the rebellion becoming the New Republic. And it is a pretty important part, but it's not as important as the rest of them. And there is still a little bit of a theoretical possibility for things to wind up in a similar way, but I don't really look at theoretical for this list specifically, and since it is still a pretty big moment, I am putting it here, but the mistake isn't as bad as some of the others that are made, which cause a lot more of a big impact on the galaxy, which is shown in the next one. At number 6 is the plot by Palpatine and Vader to use Galen Merrick, better known as Starkiller, to round up the Emperor's enemies and try to get them all in one spot so they could execute them. And this is a big mistake because although it's a plan that nearly worked, it did fail when Vader managed to fail to kill his apprentice on Corellia and sent him toppling over a cliff. When Starkiller survived, he managed to infiltrate the first Death Star and break in and not only save the rebellion's leaders, but also managed to inspire them to fully fight against the Empire. And this is devastating for the Empire, since in a move to try and get all of Palpatine's enemies out in the open and execute them all, they managed to make a mistake where it caused the rebellion that would eventually defeat them to be formed, and this is why it goes over decision for Cassian, because although Cassian did have a big impact, I think that this one goes a lot bigger over it, since this caused the rebellion movement, and we never see the official beginning of the rebellion really in anything from canon. We do get some hints in Andor and Rebels to how the rebel cells start moving together into one unified rebellion, but there was no major mistake like this one that caused it, and it was more the people of the galaxy getting tired of Imperial treatment. But Palpatine and Vader accidentally made this go faster, trying to manipulate Starkiller, who managed to win even in death. Going into the top 5, we have at number 5 Palpatine putting his full focus on killing Luke Skywalker. And this is a mistake that did have giant galactic impacts. And everything from here on goes into galaxy changing events and things that could change the fate of the universe. And really do, but this is probably the smallest of them. I think 4 and 5 could be switched, which you will see when we get to 4, but Palpatine deciding to focus fully on kill Luke is made into a mistake when Luke pleads for his father's help, and Palpatine thinks that Vader is fully loyal to him, not knowing that Vader would betray him and grab him and throw him down the reactor, and this leads to his empire collapsing in both canon and legends. In canon, it is set up by him so only his best and most loyal followers could go to form the First Order, and in legends, it's more of a power grab that leads to a pretty devastating war, which eventually gets the galaxy to the point where things are pretty bad when Palpatine returns both times. In canon, he returns and is taken out, but in Legends, he's returned and taken out also, but it just leaves him with so much less, and having to try and take the galaxy back after it's been mainly liberated by the New Republic, and puts him in a position where he can't use the manipulations he used before to have the galaxy give power to him, and instead has to conquer the galaxy. If he was a little more alert to everything, he would have been easily able to kill Vader with his Force Lightning and kill Luke. And with the fact that the Death Star 2 was already lost at that point, he would have easily been able to escape and make it off and continue controlling the galaxy and eventually break down the rebellion, since no one else stood a chance of beating him. And with this one mistake, Palpatine changed the galaxy forever by dying for the first time and allowing the New Republic to be created and be able to become an official foothold in the galaxy that was able to defeat him in Legends, and the remnants of it were able to defeat him in the sequel trilogy. At number 4, we have the New Republic, and specifically Borsk Valia not taking the Yuuzhan Vong as a serious threat until it was too late. And this is mainly because of how Bothans operate and how Valia wanted to try and manipulate the situation for himself. And just through doing this and him being in control of the New Republic, he not only led to the New Republic government being destroyed, but didn't take the action to stop the Vong and led to a war that could have been a little more easily averted and not been as intense. His mistake caused trillions of deaths, the terraforming of multiple worlds, including Coruscant, and just extremely devastating events that really altered the galaxy forever. And it also caused a chain reaction of events that led to some pretty bad stuff happening. And if they just simply took the Vong as a serious threat, things would have wound up pretty differently, and a lot of people who could have died would not have, and characters like Jacen Solo may not have fallen to the dark side, and the being known as Abeloth may not have been released, at least for a long time. And that's some more hypothetical stuff, but the fact that there were trillions killed, the New Republic was destroyed, and this massive war was able to be escalated just made things, I think, a lot more destructive than Palpatine's first death. So I just put it just above it, but does not go into the top 3 because the top 3 just are really major events that really changed the fate of the galaxy forever. At number 3, we have a really major mistake, which is the public officers being drunk trying to kill a man named Des. And I bet you're wondering, if you don't know what I'm referring to, how could this be such a big mistake? But I will explain this with a sub decision that's kind of tied for it. And this is the fact that after they tried to kill this man named Des, he went and managed to kill them and was forced to join with the Sith, which leads to the second mistake, which is Des's commanding officer refusing to listen to him, and through this it gets him more quickly revealed to the Sith that he is a Force sensitive, and they take him into his ranks to become a Sith Lord. And there, Des chooses his Sith name as Bane. And now I've said his Sith name, I think you can see where this goes, especially if you have read the Darth Bane trilogy. And through this mistake that they made, these public officers and then his commanding officer, and then even the Brotherhood of Darkness, these mistakes that were made led to Des revealing that he believes to know how to truly defeat the Jedi, and that the Sith were doing it all wrong, that they could not share power, but instead they had to only have 2 Sith Lords. Through this, he set up his ultimate plan and the rule of two after looking at the holocron of Darth Revan, and through that he was able to manipulate all the Sith in the Brotherhood of Darkness to doing a ritual called the Thought Bomb, which they thought would just wipe out the Jedi, but instead it managed to wipe out most of the Force sensitives on the planet of Rusan and permanently change the planet. But those impacts are relatively small, besides the fact of what he did after, and is to set up the rule of two, and he has also a plan for the Sith to be in the shadows, and through that he manipulated the galaxy to eventually have the Sith rise to power, as the Jedi would go into comfort and believe the Sith were extinct. They slowly built up and eventually get to the events that will be at number two. But this mistake was pretty big and just caused so many things to be set in motion for the galaxy to be changed forever. And even though it was a slow build-up, these things were vital to the changing of the galaxy, and if it was not made, the galaxy would be a very different place. And the 1,000 years of peace that happened certainly would have happened. And I say it for certainty because no one else really would have came to Bane's conclusions, and this would have changed everything, and none of Star Wars would have happened. Going to number two is a extremely major mistake that was made by Anakin Skywalker, and that was him trusting Palpatine and deciding to become his apprentice. And we all know the story of this. Anakin Skywalker, wanting to save his pregnant wife from death in childbirth, decides to cut off the hand of Mace Windu and turns to the dark side. After this, he goes on the genocide of the Jedi Order through Order 66 and manages to help the Empire be established. And if he didn't do this, the galaxy would have been saved from all this, with Mace Windu killing Palpatine. But the creation of the Empire is an event that changes the galaxy's history forever, and the fact that it all hinged on the decision that Anakin Skywalker made, whether to save Palpatine or let Windu kill him. It really just impacts the galaxy so much. If this didn't happen, then the Clone Wars would have just ended, and the galaxy would have been in relative peace, unless Palpatine managed to have a bunch of backup set, which he did at least with some recordings of his security that he did make sound like the Jedi were just trying to assassinate him. But still, the fact that it caused the creation of the Empire and so many things happen, which is essentially everything that's happened on this list besides the thing with Darth Bane and my earlier mention of Scourge. In both canon and legends, this mistake caused an extreme amount of damage to the galaxy, but isn't that as devastating as the next one, because this did have an impact on the galaxy and its future. It did happen pretty far into it, and this is a mistake, and number one, that is far more devastating, so let's go straight to it. At number one is the most massive mistake, at least in my opinion, which is the Mortis gods, or the ones, deciding to give just a little too much freedom to the being that will become known as Abeloth. And this is number one because they created a near unstoppable monster by doing this and giving her just a little too much freedom so she could go in the, I believe it's the Fountain of Power and Pool of Knowledge. It might have been switched over Fountain and Pool for, but it still is a extremely bad decision because with this they created the being known as Abeloth, who always caused extreme chaos and destruction against the entire galaxy. And a subdivision of this is that the Mortis gods brought in Anakin Skywalker and were killed so they weren't able to prevent Abeloth and her trail of destruction when she returned. Because once that happened, Abeloth caused extreme chaos throughout the galaxy, nearly killing Jedi Grandmaster Luke Skywalker, and continuing to come back and not only drive Jedi insane, but destabilize the Galactic Alliance and push for things to get to such a worse point. And this decision created this such powerful being, and is something that none of the characters on this list could have permanently stopped without the Dagger of Mortis. It just made things so much worse, and the fact that the ones are no longer there to stop this being just makes things even more extreme. But yeah, that's a really big mistake and just causes so much more to happen. And the impact of Abeloth is just extreme, and the power she has is unbelievable. I think that alone puts it at number one. So yeah, honestly, this was a really fun video to make. I didn't expect it to be this long. Right now it's about 42.5 minutes. And I'm going to do a little more to just close it out. And I do like the ranking of all of these. There are some things that didn't fully make it, like the Rakata fully using the dark side to power their machines and some other stuff, but I think that this is probably the 10 biggest mistakes. Although I haven't read everything in Star Wars Legends, I think that these 10 are probably the biggest. The one I think you could definitely move out of here is one of the huts, and something else can go in to replace it. But still, I think that this is a great list of mistakes, and I want to know what you think. These mistakes are pretty big and cause galaxy-destroying events. Well, at least some of them just cause some pretty big damages to certain groups in the galaxy and cause a lot more destruction. But I really do want to know what you think because I had a lot of fun making this video and think that things really worked out well. It is pretty interesting to look at these decisions and the impact it has, but I also want to know what you think. Please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you on the next episode of Legends and Theories. Thank you for watching this episode of Legends and Theories. Please subscribe, like the video, share the video, leave a comment, check out the video on screen, and may the Force be with you.